All right, guys, before we get started here for the first episode of season 6, I just want to say that I'm excited that we're at this point in time. And as some of you guys are starting to come in and, pay attention to those notifications and be a part of the chat, I am really excited that Grant and I have been doing this for 6 seasons. So this is, 2.5 years in. You guys have followed us the whole way. So welcome back to the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. You all know who I am. My name is Jason. I'm the car guy of this operation. And next to me is my partner in crime,
Grant Tommy, or straight Six Fan. I think that makes me Six Fan of this operation. So welcome everybody. And yes, as Jason said, we always make the joke that they renewed our contract for one more season, and so they're going to let us go on with this show. No, but we really appreciate everybody who spends their Thursday nights with us. You guys the community is what's made this show successful, and it's really just gratifying that there's actually, literally a demand for us to do this for a 6th season.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest parts of being able to do this show and be a part of the car community is having such a loyal fan base that joins us every single week. And this is the point in time where we actually jump into the chat and recognize you guys. Grant, why don't you see who all is in there?
Well, it's almost like I could probably blindly say King Eric, the greatest of all, has to be in here, but I don't know. I don't see him yet. But Trucker Dave, Will's Wheels, Robert's Garage, GMC Texas, Roy Marco's Garage, Trucker Dave. I think I'm starting to repeat myself here a little bit. Stuff with Cletus in Nick's Garage. So welcome Nick or George, more than likely, to the chat.
Yeah, so if you guys were with us for season 5, you know that we made a few changes with regards to how things roll. We had some great guests on the show, and that is not going to change. We have a large lineup of guests. In fact, in season 6, we're going to have more guests as part of the show, and a little less of what we classify as the legacy episodes, where it's just Grant and I. So we're going to be starting to do that next week, jumping right into some guests, and you'll have to stay tuned to our Instagram. If you don't follow Grant and I on Instagram, I am at Old Car Guy, and Grant is at Straight Six Fan. You can follow us for some inside tips, tricks, and behind the scenes of some of the things that we do.
And it's one other change to anticipate here in season 6. We have listened to you, the fans, and the feedback you've given us, and that is primarily has always been keep the conversation going longer. And now, when Jason and I started this, we wanted to set ourselves up in a way that we wanted to be able to deliver something consistently and not take away a ton of time from our busy schedules, and have a family life, right? But as we've grown and this thing is kind of feeding on itself and growing each and every season, it just makes sense to extend it a little more. And I think our target threshold now, I think we're going to be north of 40 minutes. 40 to 45 is kind of the sweet spot we want to land in this go around. But excited for that. And we think tonight's conversation will be one that should probably go on for a while. But Jason, anything else you want to cover about what to anticipate here with season 6?
Yeah, I think we'll just cover one last thing. You guys know that last season, when you guys were graciously giving away in the super chats, we recognize that. And although that we have not necessarily secured anything hardcore for season 6, just note that we are recognizing your super chats. We appreciate everything you guys give. Don't feel obligated, but we're hoping that there's some way that we can give back for that. Having said that, let's jump into the topic of conversation, which has actually been huge in several areas on Instagram, on Facebook. We posted that we're going to do a carburetor versus EFI. And I don't think either one of us, Grant or myself, are going to take a side on that. But we want to get your input on some of the ideas that we had and some of the conversations we've had with other people. And I'm going to be reading some posts from a Facebook post that I did as well. So, Grant, why don't you start us off with the topic at hand?
Well, first off, when we talk about feedback from the fans, thank you, Will's Wheels, for letting me know my mic was up a little bit. Let me know if this is any better. I've turned it down a little bit on my mixer. So, but the topic that we are trying to cover here tonight, it all started off when I was having a good back and forth direct message conversation with someone on Instagram. They saw one of my Fairmont posts, and they were asking about if I was still running the Motorcraft 2150 carburetor on it. As you guys know, if you've been following my channel for a long time, I just could not sort out an overfueling issue with the motorcraft, so I switched to a Holly 2-barrel. So anyway, we're having this back and forth. They're a Jeep owner, so an AMC owner, and AMC actually use motorcraft carburetors as well, and so that's why they had a special interest in this. And so we're just going back and forth, having a good, because I was actually trying to upgrade to an AMC motorcraft carb that came off of a Jeep. But anyway, like the conversation, I'm trying to go to bed. Like it's getting late, and they leave me with this like cliffhanger that I'm like, I really want to sink my teeth into this because I don't necessarily agree with you, and that is this carbs versus EFI. And they said, and I quote, this person says, I have to have a lot of old school stuff in my life, and I responded to them, and they said, and if people tell you it's not as reliable as new school stuff, they are lying. And that is when I was like, no, wait a second. Like, I understand the simplicity of a carburetor. There's a lot of beauty in that. And I really appreciate, like, you can most definitely overcomplicate almost anything in life. And so in a lot of ways, I appreciate what carburetors are. But I thought it was very disrespectful to modern day engineers. Sure, like a 1984 Ford before they went to the 5.0 as we know it, with the intake manifold that does that number. Yeah, we didn't have computer technology to keep up with the fuel management system for electronic fuel injection, and it sucked back then. But the reliability of a modern day car, the amount of times, like, I've owned since 2004 model year, like 5 or 6 different cars that I've taken to 215,000 miles with very little maintenance or very little repairs. The reliability of a modern day fuel injected motor really, in my mind, is really, really hard to beat. And that's kind of where this conversation started. I've been talking too long. Jason, I just want to hand it over to you and just let you kind of take it from your perspective, what you were thinking when I lobbed this topic your way.
Well, at first I thought, it's you're going to have the diehards one way and the diehards the other way. And I think the biggest thing is that it doesn't matter what you're talking about when it comes to cars, sports, politics, religion, whatever the topic happens to be, you're going to have people who are hardcore one way and hardcore the other. And just as soon as we kind of really started getting into, the crux of this conversation, the chat started blowing up with, carbs, and EFI, and then you got Rust Belt Mechanic who pipes in and says diesel injection. So, I mean, the idea here is, the whole premise of tonight's topic is simply to have people open their minds to both sides of the conversation and understand where it's coming from. And I thought, what a perfect opportunity, because I've got 2 different cars. One of them has a carburetor, one has EFI. And the ability to be able to compare the two, which I still need to do a video on that, is simply listen to what's at hand. There's different arguments you can have. Carburetor, many small pieces, many moving parts to make it work. An EFI system, although very few mechanical parts, there's a lot of electrical parts. And so there's more room for things to go wrong, people may say that way. The idea is we want to stir this conversation. So I have a question for you guys in the chat, and Grant, I'm going to ask you first, and then we'll go to the chat, is why do you think people will like a carburetor over an EFI?
Well, that's a great segue, because I was probably going to say much of what I'm about to say anyway. Before I get there, I did want to give a shout out to Stuff with Cletus. He was just kind of, being facetious about just go electric vehicle and beat both. And so, but hey, it's the further we go on, the more valid that is. But shoot, now the question was, why do I think people side on the side that they do? Basically, was that the crux of the question?
Well, more specifically towards carburetor, we'll ask the same question about EFI, but why carburetor?
I think it's simplicity for one. It's the thought that the only thing I need to fix this problem is with a screwdriver. That sort of mentality. It's more complicated than that, I found. It's not that easy. I think it's mostly that, but I think I will say much the same thing for even the EFI side of the coin, is that people just know what they know, and what they're most familiar with is what's better to them. Like they make electronic fuel injection out to be, it's Greek. It's way foreign to me. It's hieroglyphics. I can't ever understand this. There's miles of a wiring harness. Now, definitely, if you have to piece together a wiring harness like from the factory, that's ridiculous. But Jason, for me watching videos like your Phytech installation, your Holley Sniper, it doesn't really look like a whole lot of wires to me. It looks pretty much like you plug this connector into this connector. Now, I'm probably oversimplifying this, but that's what I think of why people say carb only, is because honestly, they've driven more of those cars, and the one time they had a fuel injected engine, and especially if it landed in like that 90s, like mid 80s to late 90s range, when computer technology really wasn't catching up to what it was trying to do for you, the people are like, oh, it's Greek to me, it's foreign. But how many times have we said that in the automotive world? And then you're 5 years down the road, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, yeah, the 2015 model really isn't that hard to work on.
No. Well, I mean, when you said, oversimplifying an EFI install, I mean, you guys saw that video. You knew exactly what I was doing. You saw it every step of the way. It truly is that simple. Do I still have a few things that I'm working on? Absolutely. Should I have mounted the fuel pickup at the rear of the tank in an unbaffled tank? No, I shouldn't have. So that's one thing that I got to work towards. But having said that, that is the only issue I'm having with the system right now, is at less than half a tank of gas, the fuel sloshes away. I can't pick up. Other than that, I do find the EFI to be a little more responsive. Actually, not a little, a lot more responsive. I find it to be more efficient as far as the smell of raw gas. I don't get that really bad, harsh, eye-watering gas smell. And, from a point of people who are old school versus new school and knowing what they know, like you said, I'm that guy in the middle who is not a carburetor expert. I am also not an EFI expert. I don't know how to fine tune my Phytech. I've got it set up the way that it is right out of the box, basically after the initial setup. But when it comes to carburetors, I'm a little bit green with that as well. So I can go either way on this topic of conversation, knowing that I know the basics on both sides, but I'm not a professional or a skeptic on either one.
And that's where I land too on this. I did want to make note of, if you can pull up Rick Teague's last comment, Jason. He was talking about basically it comes down to cost.
Yep.
It's and he brings up a good point. I mean, these I don't know what the Holley Sniper goes for. He was saying $2,000 to $3,000. I don't think you have to spend $3,000 to convert, but
I don't think you have to. But I mean, there are kits out there. But yes, you're going to spend likely 3 to 4 times on an EFI system than you are on a carburetor. It's plain and simple.
Yep, that's a definite fair point. But what I find for me, I'll start here. Actually, the carburetor technology that we've all come to love and appreciate probably peaked about things probably haven't changed from a carburetor standpoint since about 1972 or something. Like the Holley carb style as we know it really probably hasn't changed. I mean, someone could probably correct me and tell me a better time frame, but think about that for just 1 second, right? It took till 1972 to get something to that level of reliability and consistency and trustworthiness. It's not like we're throwing on carburetors from 1952, right? Carter carbs from 1952. We would look at those things and say the side draft carb, that makes no sense on this car build. Why would you do that? Same thing with EFI, right? Like everybody got this impression once we crossed over again that like 1985 to 95 period. Oh no, this is just throw my hands up. I don't know what's going on here. Like I've got warning light after warning light. Well, modern day fuel injection is so much better. And then like these kits, I specifically want to hone in on the kits like the Sniper and the Phytech, Jason, like you're running. I honestly think that's kind of like, that's a super simple system. Like you don't have to run down 8 injectors on a V8, right? It's all being injected at that port or the intake manifold. It's, to me, that's the better version of the carburetor.
Yeah, and I just want to make a response to a couple of comments there. King Eric, the greatest of all, has made it, guys. The show is able to start now. And he asked, will the Yugo be EFI? Yes and no. As it currently sits with its 1.1, it will be a carbureted engine. I just rebuilt the carb this week, and I'm waiting on the fuel pickup. So there will be an EFI system going into that setup. We went back to talk about, I think I missed a comment by Luke who said, he said, very true. Let's see a 14 Camaro fire up after 30 years. And these are some of the things that, in 30 years, when we're doing car revivals, how many of these electronics are going to survive being dry for that long a time? And you're starting to see a few guys do revivals on OBS trucks or the old Fords, the Ford pickups with the electronic fuel injection. And it's just not the same as reviving an old carburetor. And, we're talking about the smells. We're talking about the simplicity with just simple air fuel and dumping raw fuel down its throat. We are coming into a situation where there's a place, there's a time and a place for each of those applications, right? And fortunately for us as hot rodders, there is an opportunity for us to go that EFI route depending on the operation that we're choosing to go with. Novatez says he's got $2,000 tied up into his Holly setup. And I don't doubt that one bit, because you got to buy the carb, you got to buy the fuel pump, you got to buy all that stuff to make everything work together. But at the end of the day, you're going to have some benefits to that you don't have with a carburetor. But yet, a carburetor is so much more simple. With very little electronics needed, if not at all.
I did want to say hey to Antonio, Claudio, Michael. Thanks for dropping in. Thanks for saying hello. But I did want to go back to something else that Luke said, and he said carbs were reliable way before 72, and I think you're kind of missing the point that I was going after. What I'm saying is, like, the people throwing the carburetor you're ordering from Jegs or Summit right now is not the way it was built in 1951. It's the way it was built. Like, we had about 30 years of practice to get to a point to where, since about 1972, Holly is making the same carburetor the same way since about 1972. You're not using the 1941 version, and that's not the most efficient, best version of a carb. It's, we continue to make our stuff better every year. That was the point I was trying to make. Like, I'm not saying carbs weren't reliable, but if you had a choice, Luke, on your next 440 build to put a carburetor from 1951 on the 440 versus something that came from that 1969 era, which one are you going with?
Yeah, and I think there's, even when it comes to EFI too, I think it might have even been Luke or somebody back up in the chat who said, are we talking, multi-port fuel injection? Are we talking TBI? Well, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we really could be talking just about anything that you're going from old to new. There's a lot of vehicles out there that already have the multi-port, the TBI, or the direct injection. But I think the idea and the topic of this conversation simply is, if you had the choice to keep a carburetor on a car that came with one versus going with EFI. So there's a lot of different paths you can kind of go down that road. And I think for simplicity's sake, we're talking TBI.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. That's
what these Holly systems and Phytech systems really are, is throttle body injection.
I suppose you could also include in there, I'm talking from the Ford side of things, and I only know this from when I owned my 95 Ford F-150, but when you went from speed density management to mass airflow, I would say in OBD2 computers, that very early OBD2 computer, like circa 1996 and mass airflow, is really not that complicated of a system. And that takes me to another point. Everybody talks about the simplicity. I'm going to pick on this. I probably shouldn't. I'm not in a position to do this because I don't know enough about carburetors. I'll be honest, but the king of the carbs, Thunderhead 289, loves to talk about how easy everything's to work on. But how, like, out of a month, how many times is he posting something on his Facebook group or Instagram, how he's on the side of the road having to fine tune something? For me, from a daily driver standpoint, I would much rather just take 2 cranks, fire up, and my computer is making subtle changes and monitoring and tuning my car while I'm driving, as opposed to the guy who's trying to convince me that carburetor is the only way to go, but is always working on his junk constantly. And he says it. He calls it junk. He says, "Oh, working on my junk today." And then he's trying to tell me how reliable or how awesome carburetors are. Well, you have to stay on top of that with your screwdriver, with your air fuel gauge, with your timing light. And it's like, for a daily driver, for me, give me EFI all day.
And again, this is where having a little bit of experience with EFI and driving, Dale the truck now for, how long has it been? Since February on EFI, is being able to go out those cold mornings, cycle that key, let that fuel pump prime and start it, and it runs. Pull it in gear and go. Don't need to wait for it to warm up. Just need to wait for oil pressure like you would anything else, and away you go. I like that benefit. I like being able to have that reliability, that knowing if I'm going on a long trip, whether it's city driving or highway driving, that EFI is looking after all that fine tuning for me.
King Eric the Greatest of All asks a really good question, and Jason, you might have to answer. I don't know this. I think I know it, but I don't know it. He asked, can vapor lock happen on an EFI system? And I want to reverse answer his question from the standpoint of what I'm experiencing on my Fairmont. My Fairmont still does awesome cold starting. I mean, basically 1 pump of the accelerator and it fires up after maybe 3 cranks. Now, in summertime here, even though I got the cold start to work, I've experienced this 2-3 times, when I went to the car show, when I went to the alignment shop. I drove it to the alignment shop in the morning. It cold started just great. They had moved it out of their bay. I go to pick it up, and it's over 85 degrees. It sits there and cranks and cranks and cranks and cranks, and I got to mash the pedal eventually. And then you can tell it's been overfueled. And it's just because, the gas gets hot, when it's hot out, it gets hot. I never have that issue with my Toyota Tacoma. I'm just saying.
Yeah. One of the questions that was raised in a post that I made on the actual FiTech, I posted this live show on the FiTech forum on Facebook, and it prompted some conversation there as well. One of the things that I was reading through on that page was somebody talking about heat soak. And I know that people with carburetors can tend to have that issue as well. In fact, I've run into it on occasion. And people will always tell you to go with a phenolic spacer between the intake and the carburetor. And that'll help keep things from getting too hot in the carburetor, boiling that fuel. The same thing can happen with EFI. And some of the guys are experiencing that problem with their EFIs because they don't have that spacer. All they got is the gasket between the carb. And in fact, that is something that I'm getting ready to do, is put a spacer in mine to help eliminate that problem with these hotter temperatures that we're running into.
Yeah. Yeah, and Haggard Hot Rods drops in. He said, I've seen old-time hot rodders hate on EFI until they start playing with them. And I've seen that trend as well. I've seen, I wish Dan from Greasy Boy Customs was able to drop in, because I know he made a similar comment on one of my posts. So, it's, I don't know. I think I've covered the things I wanted to cover. I'm sure if Jason, you have other points to make, I'm sure I can respond to something in the chat. But I mean, I've kind of gotten off my chest what I wanted to.
Well, I think the biggest thing was to invoke chat, to get some of these people talking about the differences between the two, what they prefer, what somebody likes, and I think the idea is that there's I said it before, there's a time and a place for each of them, and if you're willing to try something new, which I did with the FiTech EFI, I happened to try it, and I happened to like it. Does that mean I'm going to throw out all my carburetors on everything I own? Absolutely not. Because even though I do have a Holley Sniper for the Chrysler Cordoba, I have yet to install it for a couple of reasons. One, super busy. Two, no garage because I sold my house. And three, we're just in the middle of moving into this new place. You guys, I'm in my new house. This is the first night we're spending the night here. Internet, all that stuff is ready to roll. So I want to be able to run that, even though I put the brand new carburetor on that car a while back. I want to be able to play around with that as well and compare the EFI from Holley and the EFI from Phytech. There's some fine tuning that needs to be done. So there are a couple of questions that I did want to ask the chat and see what kind of answers we get. We're getting a lot of that already because people are talking back and forth with each other. I want to know what your thoughts are. If somebody was to give you an EFI, doesn't matter what the system is, would you take it for starters? And B, would you be willing to be open-minded enough to learn it and install it and use it to its potential? I want to see people in the chat answering this question of would you use an EFI and would you give it the opportunity to impress you or to change your mind one way or the other?
While the chat is responding to that, I did see Terrence Seymour had kind of made a comment about, for him, it's fun to tune a carb is like kind of almost like therapy. Like there's like, hey, I can just mechanically make something just run like a top. And I think there's something to be said about that. And for as much as I sounded off before about kind of picking at Luke over at Thunderhead 289, I will say that and while I do also like the EFI system learning itself and tuning itself as it goes, the downfall of that with the EFI system is it's like, the toad in the boiling pot of water, where very slowly, if it's not recognizing really the right thing, you don't realize it, but all of a sudden you're down the road and something's way out of tune, and then you have to go diagnose it through, like an OBD2 scan tool or whatever the case may be, the little interface that comes with the Holley Sniper or whatever. And sometimes you have to reset and start from scratch, and there's a lot more things to hunt down because it could be a fuel line pressure issue, it could be an electronics issue. So there is something to be said about that as well. And I do think Terrence brings up a good point as well.
Yeah, and one of the things too is that something that maybe some of you guys don't realize is that when you're using the Phytech system or the Holley system, they both come with the computerized handheld that allows you to go and do your fine tuning. But it's got its own built-in OBD2 type diagnostic where it will give you trouble codes. So if you are having an issue with something, whether it be fuel injection related, air fuel mixture related, whatever it happens to be, fuel pressure, you'll get some sort of an indication. You plug in your screen, you go into the trouble codes, and it will tell you exactly what might be the problem. And just like any factory fuel injected car today, is you use your scan tool or you use that device to kind of point you in the direction to start looking for things that you may be using.
And for the people who say, well, you're not a mechanic, you're just learning how to read codes and it's dumbing things down for you, I would debate that by saying, and I wished I would have brought it in from the garage, but I have a Chilton's manual for my Fairmont, from the 80s. And in the back of it is a troubleshooting guide that explains car, hesitates on acceleration. Okay, well, it's either this, or this. How is that any different than plugging in the OBD2 and it says, you have a PO171 code? Okay, what's a PO171 code? Oh, that means the O2 sensor is failing, or whatever the case may be. It's the same thing. It's just the digital version. And I just think people are kind of like closed-minded in that regard. Like, I'm like you, Jason. Like, I've enjoyed learning carbureted system with the Fairmont project. And yeah, like anything, everything's got a learning curve. And I've had to pull my hair out a couple of times because I just don't understand it because it's my first go around. But there's something beautiful about the simplicity of it. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to daily drive something, I'm going to go EFI. And Jason is muted. There we are, the first one of season 6.
Dang it.
No, it's part of the show, Jason.
part of the
Like,
show.
there's
I did it. So what I was saying very politely while my mic was muted is I've said it 2 or 3 times is that there is a time and there is a place and it may or may not be for everybody. And, being the guy that kind of sits on the fence on one way or the other, because I'm not an expert on either one, is I am willing to learn. I recently rebuilt the carburetor on something I had absolutely no clue what it was about. And it was a 2-barrel Weber carburetor off of the Yugo. And I've had lots and lots of Hollies and Edelbrocks torn apart in my day, Quadrajets as well. Never actually done a 2150 or a 4150, but nevertheless, thank you, NARC Select Customs, for $5. I really appreciate that. I'll make a note of that. The idea behind tearing apart a carburetor is learning. Luckily for me, I had a manual that told me where everything went. And when there was more than one opportunity to put a jet in the left side or the back side, well, luckily I had something telling me what to do. And there's always YouTube. There's always friends. There's always people that you can lean on to do that. Every community has their carb guru. One thing that I do know is that not every community has their EFI guru. I come from a small town of roughly 5,000 people, maybe 15,000 people in the surrounding area. There's only one guy that I know who has an EFI system on his Camaro or his truck that I can go to ask questions that I might not know the answer to. So the idea is that carburetors have been around, obviously, for a lot longer than EFI systems, and there's more people who know more about them. Finding someone to help you, there might be a small challenge.
Yeah, and so I've got like 3 different ways to go right now. I just did see a comment come in from Luke over at Coastal Auto Reaction, and he said Chilton's manuals are not shop manuals. I get it. Same point stands, though. The shop manual is going to tell you certain things, how to diagnose a car, right? If this is happening, check for this. And that was the point I was trying to make. That's what the OBD2 sensor is doing. It's saying, okay, I'm setting off this code, which means you need to know to go look for this. And they're not necessarily like bulletproof either. Like it can sometimes one code can mean 3 different things, but that's not any different than the shop manual telling you that same thing on a carbureted car. Like it seems like the same thing, but NARC Select at Customs did say EFI and turbos are like PB&J, and yes, that is another point I was wanting to make. Anybody, I've seen this. I don't know how many different communities have been part of. Whether it's my OBS Ford days, whether it was just here on YouTube, on 4eyedpride.com, which is all about 4-eyed fox bodies. They're inevitably Eric the car guy, Eric the car guy with his Fairmont build puffed his chest out and talked about how he's going to build this killer small block Ford with a turbocharger and a blow-through carburetor setup. And everybody's like, no, dude, save yourself the trouble. You're never going to get it right. Go EFI. No. And he puffed his chest out more and more around every corner, brought it up in several videos. And what did he eventually wind up doing? Moving to a system like a Holley Sniper or Phytech for his turbocharged small block Ford. So I agree with what NARC Select at Custom said. If you're even considering going turbocharger, it's, in my opinion, 95% in favor of EFI, 5% lunatics out there who want to do the blow-through carb thing and get it to work fine. Do it. And then do exactly what Eric the car guy did.
Yeah,
come back around to you.
One of the things Luke said, where is it? Right there. Oh, he says he doesn't use Haynes or Chilton's manuals. And there's a reason why Haynes and Chilton's manuals exist. And they're for guys like myself, maybe, and Grant, who aren't mechanics, who are just hobbyists who want to learn because they have some pretty good guidelines, torque specs, different types of specs that you may need when doing things. Someone who is a mechanic, like yourself, Luke, who has access to shop manuals is likely where you would want to go anyway, because shop manuals have a lot more information and they're not dumbed down for guys like myself. And maybe I'm speaking too poorly for Grant, but
no, not at all.
again, it's one of these things. There's a place for these manuals. If there was a book called Mechanics for Dummies, I'd probably own it. I'd probably have all 250 volumes. I don't know.
That's what I was going to say. Carburetors for Dummies. That's
Yep.
yeah. The other thing I had wrote down on here is going back to, I don't remember who made the comment, but about cost, right? So in a sort of dream sleeper scenario for Project Low Fairmont, it would have had a camshaft, and I have the internet's most hated 2-barrel carbureted V8. I know that. So, but Holly makes like a 2-barrel version that's like gold, just like some of those old carbs are. I would have run the 2-barrel version just again because if someone's looking close, it still looks like a 2-barrel carburetor. But at that point, that would be the most stupid thing to do because of the cost. If I really wanted to go fuel injection on Project Low Fairmont and be budget minded, I would have been better off just basically pulling a 5-liter out of a mid 90s Explorer or late 90s Explorer. That's where I got the GT40P heads from, and it's a roller cam and all that stuff. Like, the cost of just plucking one of those out of a junkyard compared to then I would get EFI with all that. So the cost is definitely a huge deciding factor in this conversation in my mind.
Yeah, so as we get ready to bring this season 6, episode 1 show to a close, if you guys have any questions for Grant or I that we may not have covered, that you think we might that we should answer, or at least try to answer, go ahead and throw us a message down in the squawk box down there and see if there's something that we can you can either stump us or maybe we can help with some information. Grant, usually it's at this point in time where we do kind of open up and tell a little bit about what's coming up on each other's channels. Why don't you give us a little update or heads up on what's coming up on Straight Six Fan?
For sure. Before I do that, real quick, if Luke is still for some reason in the chat, because I know our chat here on the StreamYard interface is a little lagging. See you later. Thanks for stopping by. We appreciate you being part of the conversation, and hopefully your wife's not getting on your case yet. But so what's coming up on Straight Six Fan? Honestly, I've been super busy lately. The yesterday's episode, which is actually performing really well, doing some 0 to 60 times. That was I was running down to the wire. I did film that Tuesday night, and I feel like next week's episode is going to be very much the same, but I think it's going to be another Fairmont Files episode. That's just me driving the Fairmont somewhere, and I think we're going to go visit Scott's Speed Shop down the road from me, and I was kind of expecting him to be in the chat because I know he has a very strong opinion about carbs versus EFI. I'm going to see if I can trick him into just tuning my carburetor for me. But we'll see. I think that's what next week's episode is going to be about.
Yeah, and I don't actually have an episode coming up for this week. Just too many things going on this week with the builds. I figured I would kind of make up for it in the form of this live stream this week. But next week, I do have a couple of things coming, and one of them is the first drive with the Yugo, the new carb, the sending unit, gas tank, all that stuff back together. We also have a new stereo from Retro Manufacturing. It's a sponsored video going in Dale the truck, so we're going to get some new tunes into that truck. That'll be an update. One of the questions, or a couple of questions that have been coming up in the chat was, one of them was for me from Novitaz, and he asked me what the biggest issue with the install and setup of my EFI. There really wasn't that big of an issue with the actual install and or setup. What I found out later was to be the fact that the installation of the pickup on the gas tank, I mounted it at the rear. I should not have, because my gas tank is not baffled. Every time I slam on the brakes with less than half a tank, all the fuel rushes the front, the thing stalls out. So I've just learned to keep more than half a tank in it till I find a solution for that. Another question was from Martin's Garage, who asked me if I was going to the Nationals in August. I don't know. It really depends on what's going on around here. I would really love to. But other than that, I don't see anything.
Jason, going back to your issue on the gas tank, those, I know that some of those companies make it's more or less, it's a glorified sock at the end of the sump.
Yep.
That it spreads out so it will absorb. Do you think would that help your circumstance?
Absolutely. I actually looked at the Holley makes one, and it's called the Hydra. something. Anyways, very, very expensive. So to get one that mounts on the bottom, that's 3 inches wide, 8 inches long, is about $250 American.
Which is the cost of a carburetor for a good brand new 650 CFM.
You can buy one of those hydromat. That's what it's called. You can buy one of those hydromats that essentially wick the whole length of your fuel tank, depending on the size of your fuel tank. Well, anybody who owns a square body knows those things are about 6 feet. And those hydromats are like $1,200. So I think I am going to experiment with one. I've got a couple. My next YouTube payout there, I think I'm going to commit to picking one up and doing that reinstallation and see if that helps, because it's a big nuisance knowing that if I want to go on a day trip, that I've got to stop at every half a tank and top up, just so that I know wherever I'm going, I'm not going to run into that stalling issue if I make it to the city and stop late, stop and go traffic, stuff like that. So Nick's Garage says, what about a foam tank insert? Those are options too. There's also options to run different tanks where the pickup is in the center. But again, you're talking a $800 tank. You're talking about a relocation. You're talking about running new lines. So there's all kinds of different things. For $250, this little hydromat sock seems to be the most cost-effective opportunity for me at the time.
I know Narc Select at Customs had asked earlier if I had any plans to make any of the stops for Rocky Mountain Race Week 2.0 this year. At the moment, no, but that's not. I don't know how far out. I think that's in September. I might be able to pull something off. If I live in the north part of the state, I know they're in like Ark City, Kansas, which is almost Oklahoma. If it's not a weeknight, I might be able to swing that. So don't know. We'll have to kick that can down the road a little bit.
Mexico Spec says, don't they make baffle tanks? Absolutely, they do. And when I was putting a new tank in my truck, that was the furthest thing from my mind, was to buy a baffle tank. I thought about maybe going with a center tank mounted in the rear between the frame rails. But again, those tanks are expensive. They're made in the USA, and shipping them to Canada was absolutely ridiculous. So I just decided to go with the standard tank. The tank was $100. I could take out the sending unit, relocate it. That's another option too.
I did also see Stuff with Cletus asked, when are we going to have him on the show? And so we've had this happen before. Someone in the chat kind of reached out that way. I mean, Jason and I actually, we prefer to do it a little differently than that, but that's not to say we do like to have a good range of big time YouTubers and smaller channels. So Stuff with Cletus, like hit either Jason or I up via direct messages or something, and we'll take a look at the calendar. We do still have some open dates. We are holding about 3 dates right now. We have a fairly big, almost celebrity status guest potentially interested in the show. We just have to reach out to this individual, here probably in a week or two. He said he's pretty booked up, and didn't know if he could commit that far out in advance. So we're holding some dates in September and October for that particular individual, but there's still plenty of other open dates on the schedule.
Yeah, so having said that, we've answered some questions coming from the chat. Mexico Spec Jay Leno, he's a very hard fellow to get a hold of. You're dealing with basically a management agency, and nobody returns calls or emails or anything. Yeah, so there you go. That's a pretty good in-depth conversation on carbs versus EFIs. I think we covered a lot of topics. We had a lot of interesting information coming from the chat. We appreciate you guys being as knowledgeable or more knowledgeable than us and helping us decide some of the topics to talk about. And next week, Grant, we do have a guest.
We do, and I just looked that up, so perfect timing because I couldn't remember. But it's our good buddies who were kind of on the YouTube hustle back trying to hit 1,000, like Jason and I when we started this adventure. 2 gents, actually. S&R Motoring will be joining us next week, so we're excited about that. Those 2 guys, I feel like our sense of humor between the 4 of us, I think it's going to be a good show. So excited about that.
Yeah, we're pretty excited. If you guys don't know who S&R Motoring, I'll do my best to try and leave a link in the description of this video, and we'll be posting about it so you guys can go find out who they are on Instagram as well as check out their YouTube. They both have got some real neat. I would even classify them as odd body cars just because of the age of them. Anyways, go over, check them out. That's it for this show. I appreciate everybody sticking around and being a part of the Car Guy and Six Fan Show Season 6, Episode 1 here on my channel. Next week, it will be over on Grant's with some guests. Hope you can make it over there. If you're not subscribed to Grant, make sure you head over and click that button and the bell and make sure you get all the notifications. That's it for me, guys. Thanks for watching. Grant, why don't you close us out?
Yeah, for everybody trying to guess who this celeb status person is, let me just say, I'll leave you with this little hint. This person might build a rat rods in the vicinity of Las Vegas, and you guys can maybe figure out from there who we might be talking about. But otherwise, yes, that's going to wrap up, I think, a pretty good episode here for Season 6 of the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. Yes, next week it is on my channel, but I did just want to say to all my Six fans out there, thanks for watching.